President Donald Trump has met with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on the sidelines of the summit. G7 leaders are trying to find common ground on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, but tensions have flared earlier after US President Donald Trump criticised the group's past decision to remove Russia. Standing alongside Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Trump said the G8 made a mistake when it kicked out Russia in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. He argued that if Russia had stayed in the group, President Putin might not have invaded Ukraine in 2022. Trump said Putin communicates only with him and not with anyone else, and that the Russian president remains upset about Russia's removal from the group, a feeling Trump says he understands. Well, this also comes as in recent times Donald Trump stepped out of the summit with Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, confirming that a deal had been struck. Trade is a key point of interest at this summit, and that the first deal since Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, with an extended period of pause, but that comes to an end on July the 8th. Further bilateral meetings have taken place between Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, while other meetings are also scheduled. Joining us from Alberta, Canada, is Megha Sharma, our Senior Executive Editor at NewsX World. Megha, lots of conversations happening with these leaders of the group of 7 nations who are present. What more can you tell us?
Right, as was well predicted and forecast, there has been a bilateral that has happened between the US President Donald Trump and his United Kingdom counterpart Keir Starmer, and there is a strong statement that has come from America. US President Donald Trump says that Keir Starmer has been able to do in just a few months what Boris Johnson and later on Rishi Sunak, who had been the heads of states of United Kingdom previously, could not do in the last 6 years. There has already been a discussion held, and in principle a deal that has been agreed upon between UK and United States. A proclamation needs to be signed by US President Donald Trump and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Now that is expected to happen on the sidelines of the G7 summit, so we are going to keep a close eye on that, but keep having a detailed view of what is it that the two countries are dealing with. Remember, the United States administration had imposed tariffs to the tune of 50% on goods and services of United Kingdom that are exported into United States of America. Topmost amongst these goods are steel and autos, the vehicles, the automobiles that enter from United Kingdom into US territory. On the other hand, UK had also threatened to ban imports from United States, which included ethanol particularly, and the second product was beef. Now at this time, all these bans and threats have been kept aside. Once the proclamation is signed by both the heads of the states, it means that the tariffs, the threat of tariffs worth 50% is going to disappear, is going to be waived off, and then it means that the United Kingdom becomes officially the first country with which United States under the Trump leadership has been able to forge ahead with a constructive, mutually beneficial trade deal. We also saw in the last few weeks there was China and United States that had been trying to negotiate to come up with a plan that was going to be helpful to both countries, to both industries in China and America. And you know, the threat of putting out of those 245% tariffs on China was also pulled away by the Trump administration, and so far we see that the semiconductors and the silicon chips that had at one point of time being halted by the US administration to enter into US territory have once again seen exports from China. Meanwhile, as we already know, that the Chinese international students are being now allowed back to study in America. So those are the outlines of what is happening at the G7 summit. We already said, tariff wars and trade negotiations are going to be on top of the agenda, and that's exactly how things are panning out as we speak.
Yes, and another bilateral conversation that has taken place is one between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. Trump earlier stating in front of media before that meeting took place that he was a tariff person. I just want to read out an update that we've had in the last couple of minutes, and that is that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says he thinks that Trump will be able to wrap up a new economic and security deal between the US and Canada with Mark Carney in the next 30 days. Mega, what can you tell us about recent relations between the US and Canada? Of course, Mark Carney had Donald Trump as a key part of his campaign in that election.
Yes, this is a forward-moving plan. This is something constructive. This is tangible. That 30 days are being allotted for a deal to be built up, the deal to be negotiated between Trump and Carney. Now, a number of products, goods that used to at one point of time travel into United States of America from Canada included lumber, included autos, included steel, as well as aluminum. Now, all these products have at this point of time, their export has been halted. There have been tariffs to the tune of 60 to 70%, even at certain stages, 100% threats that had been issued by Donald Trump. So again, 30 days are going to be crucial, and the commerce ministers and the U.S. Commerce Secretary Lutnick, they are going to thrash it out to see what are the most viable opportunities for both sides to then come up with an agreement, sign a deal. It's interesting to know as well the diatribe that has been built by Donald Trump over the past 3-4 months that he is going to annex Canada, making it the first state of United States of America. It seems to have dissipated as of now. He has not made any comment in that regard up until now. But we also understand, the kind of attention Donald Trump seeks, and a kind of he loves to make statements that that people are shocked by, surprised by, to keep the eyeballs, to have international media glued onto whatever Trump says. So a possibility, realistically, of Trump and the United States annexing Canada is a far cry from what Trump actually goes about blabbering during his press conferences and media briefings and wherever he travels to all across the globe. But the key point you already mentioned, that 30 days being allotted for a deal to be struck, and in all likelihood it is going to be a done deal in the next few weeks.
Yes, and Mega, very briefly before we let you go, in that joint press conference that was given by Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, the US president did talk about the ongoing situation between Iran and Israel. He said that he is wanting to see no nuclear weapons in Iran. This is a sentiment that has been shared throughout. Of course, negotiations between the US and Iran had been ongoing before Israel's moves to tackle nuclear facilities in the country of Iran. Trump also says that Iran wants to make a deal and that Iran should have signed the deal that the US put across. Trump spoke about not talking on the ongoing situation, but as he sometimes does, contradicting himself and raising this point to the media. What do you think his message is in these statements, and what do you think it will be moving forward as the summit continues, Mega?
I think with regards to the stance that has been taken by G7 nations, including the US president, is very clear from the onset that the G7 nations do not want Iran to have nuclear weapons, to build its nuclear arsenal, and that was made amply clear during the press briefing, the few minutes that US President Donald Trump and Keir Starmer decided to spend with the media in Kananaskis, and Keir Starmer reiterated that point, and he supported Trump and said that, you know, there has been unanimity when the point about Iran's nuclear program comes into conversation. We were talking about, you know, a joint statement that has been drafted thus far by the G7 nations. It is yet to be signed. Now, whether Trump decides to join the rest of the 6 nations and signs that joint statement condemning Iran from for its nuclear for its uranium enrichment program to build nuclear arsenal. Well, if the leaders are on the same page, I mean, one would ponder as to what is the hesitation of Donald Trump for not signing this joint statement.
Yes, Megha Sharma, thank you ever so much for joining us from Alberta. We will come back to you for more updates soon. We are joined by some guests as well. Firstly, Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, is joining us from Washington, D.C. Raymond, I want to look at trade briefly. We've heard announcements that have involved Trump, one from Trump, where he has said that this US-UK deal is done, also signalling, of course, as we just spoke about, that a 30-day period will be given and a deal with Canada is expected to be done in that time. Is this a theme, Raymond, that you think will continue, given the number of nations present or arriving who are currently in negotiations and expected to sign a deal with the US administration?
Well, thanks, Joshua, for having me. I think you have to step back a minute and look at the purpose of the G7. The G7 is to be democratic countries that have large economies that will work together to build peace and prosperity. It's not intended to be a forum for making bilateral deals as you would in a real estate kind of setting, which is, of course, President Trump's background and what he favors. Now, if you look at what has happened in regard to the UK, this is a deal which has been announced weeks ago. And so they're trying to get a additional trophy, if you will, by signing executive orders there. My understanding of the deal is that it is not nearly as comprehensive, even as, for example, the UK-India free trade agreement. It is in line with what Wall Street has been seeing, and that is that they've referred to President Trump as the taco, Trump always chickens out approach. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that there is a stepping back, and I'm glad that there is some sort of regularization. And hopefully that's going to happen with Canada as well. But it's a far cry from what Trump started out with, that he was going to put these tariffs in order to bring back manufacturing, and people were going to bend the knee to him. I think Keir Starmer has shown that the way to deal with President Trump is to flatter him, to get in the UK instance, an invitation from King Charles, and tell him that this is all great. Now, Prime Minister Carney is also very adept, although he hasn't been willing to say that, yeah, Canada's for sale as the 51st state, as Trump said in the opening way. You know, it seems to me that what we have here now is a degeneration of the G7 into a sort of a G6+1. It's sort of like a family gathering in which everybody is tiptoeing around a family member that they know has a problem, an anger problem, an outlook problem, so as not to set him off. There's no mention of climate change, for example, which is an existential question for the entire world. Trump has already said that if a statement on Iran, Israel involves asking for de-escalation, that he's not going to sign it. There is no help collectively being given to bringing an end to the war of Russia in Ukraine. The only thing that President Trump is saying is it would have never happened if he had been in charge. And of course, that's a far cry from saying that on day one of his administration he was going to solve it. So I'm pleased that there's some amelioration of the disastrous approach that was taken on April the 2nd with liberation and having these extraordinary retaliatory tariffs, if you will, which really don't have any basis in fact against allies as well as those who are adversaries. But make no mistake about it, it seems that on the question of overall economic system, overall approach to tariffs and international trade, that President Trump has abandoned that approach, the one that the United States led through the WTO, through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade before that, and we have a long way to go before we're out of the woods on this new approach of what's in it for me, America first, and you'll do what we say or else you'll not be able to deal with the United States at all. So I'm somewhat encouraged that there is some movement, but as I say, what we really ought to do is get back to a cooperative approach among these great democracies and bringing in democracies like India, Prime Minister Modi is there, and others, rather than just trying to make a few deals.
Yes, absolutely, Raymond. If you stay with us, I have some news to bring. And US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has announced the deployment of additional military assets to the Middle East to bolster defences amid escalating tensions between Iran and Israel. Hegseth emphasised that protecting American forces is the top priority. The move follows several days of intensifying conflict between the two regional powers. The Pentagon's action signals growing concern over regional stability and aims to deter threats to US personnel and interests in the area. I want to bring another update before we go back to our discussion. And this is a comment that Donald Trump has made. He has said that everyone in Tehran should evacuate. That update that we have had in, of course, coming amid strikes from both sides. Iran have said that they will continue to strike Israel into the morning with air raid sirens and swathes of people heading into their bunkers on a regular basis. Israel continuing their assault on military and nuclear sites. Now, Trump putting this warning out, a clear message. Whether that is a direct move ahead of an expected strike, we're not sure as of yet. This could be Trump rhetoric, but the situation in the Middle East is, of course, consuming a lot of thought and conversation that is going on in geopolitics at the moment and at the G7 summit. I'm going to bring in Daniel Roth, who is a research director for United Against Nuclear Iran, who is joining us from New York. We brought you that update that Pete Hegseth had there, talking about a movement of military assets towards the region, saying that this is coming, of course, amid the escalating tensions and to bolster what is already in the region in terms of US bases and US military assets. What's the significance of US involvement in this? Of course, the US were discussing a nuclear deal with Iran. Israel, many think, took matters into their own hands, but have had the support of the United States. Daniel, could this become a dual-pronged attack with support from the US in a military capacity, potentially using the bunker-busting bombs that we know are needed to tackle some of Iran's nuclear sites?
Well, hello, Joshua. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's quite significant. I think that Secretary Hegseth has made that announcement quite clear. Naturally, I think Israel and America have always been pretty aligned on this, despite what some in the media have been saying about there being an internal split within the administration. I think ultimately it is the kingmaker, the real man behind everything is the president himself. I mean, with respect to those tactical considerations, the bunker bomb, yes, I think if Israel really thinks it really wants them, I think America would be happy to loan those B-2 bombers and those MOB, those big penetrating bombs to get through the Fordo enrichment center, which is the one that's still standing. Natanz reportedly is pretty much collapsed. Certainly on the upper structures, the lower structures we're not sure about. On the Iranian side, though, I mean, this is you just mentioned about President Trump's Truth Social post there. I think that's just a natural response to Iranian belligerence. Iran was quite clear that despite the US saying that this was a unilateral Israeli action once they were striking Iran a couple of days ago or 3 nights ago, they were very clear to say that this was just on the Israelis. However, the Iranians immediately said none of this could have happened without the authorization of the Americans, and we attribute blame as much to the US as to Israel. So I think that this kind of rhetoric from the president is probably in response to Iran ramping up the bellicosity of things as well. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, I think the US has Israel's back, and that will include military assets and kinetic action if it comes down to it.
Yes, Daniel, Trump has reiterated his comment that Iran need to get a deal done. I want to look at the previous Iran nuclear deal that was agreed in 2015. You will probably have a lot more insight into that than most, but we know that deal took time. It was involving multiple countries. It wasn't done in a short period of time, years in the making. Donald Trump has come in, he sent Steve Witkoff, who isn't traditionally a diplomat, and has given Iran 60 days to get a deal done. Was that firstly unrealistic? And given that that's the time frame Israel have used for their assault, was there a chance of diplomacy here if it had been given more time?
I don't think time was the important factor in this. I think the important factor was the Iranian regime's propensity to back down on its nuclear program. And as has been quite clear since the early 2000s when it was revealed, the Iranians simply do not want to back down. They feel like they've invested, I think some estimates say probably $100 billion in that program over the years. I think that's a very conservative estimate. So there's a kind of sunk cost fallacy that they're engaging in. In terms of that 2015 deal, though, yes, it took many years to come to fruition. However, this time around, there could have been a deal within 60 days. I've got no doubt about that. Had the Iranians simply said, okay, we're going to stop enrichment. We're going to dismantle our uranium enrichment plants. We understand that the world does not trust us on enrichment. This is the big thing. They could have had this regional consortium, like many other countries that are party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But Iran, like the Soviet Union during the Cold War, just has this insistence on keeping this uranium, this nuclear program, clearly not for civilian purposes, as they always say. Every single interview that I ever see a regime person talk about, they say this was civilian purposes. We have this fatwa against the nukes. Absolute nonsense. No other country that's a signatory to the NPT or that does not have nuclear weapons right now is enriching to the kind of levels, 60%, that Iran has been hitting over the past year or so. And then that's a short step to 90%, which is weaponization. Ultimately, yes, for time, I think President Trump did a good thing there. 60 days, do not let the Iranians just keep slow walking this process. They could have slow walked it to the October deadline where snapback sanctions from the UN were no longer a threat. They could have slow walked it even 4 years and had a new, more friendly president in power in the US. So 60 days, that's exactly what I would have done.
Thank you, Daniel. We are going to briefly move away from Iran for a moment. We're going to head to the World Health Organization, which says no fuel has entered Gaza for more than 100 days. Attempts to retrieve fuel stocks from evacuation zones have been denied, says Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, on X. He wrote, "This is pushing the health system closer to the brink of collapse. 17 hospitals, 7 field hospitals and 43 primary health centres barely running on minimum daily fuel will soon have none left. No fuel means no power for ventilators, dialysis machines, anaesthesia equipment and incubators, and a lot more." Well, Raymond, I'm going to come back to you. Of course, the recent flare-up in military activity from both Israel and Iran has taken the spotlight in the Middle East, but an ongoing situation in Gaza, something that world leaders who are currently at the G7 summit have been vocal in speaking out about, a shift seemingly from support to Israel and then moving towards some level of condemnation. Given the fact that this G7 summit is ongoing, do you think there will be discussions about Gaza, notably as well because the key ally of Israel, the US, will be present and potentially discussions could have an impact if US relations with Israel are relayed and those messages get across between those partners?
Question that this sort of conflict should have a place in terms of G7. If you're going to bring peace to a situation, you need to be able to have a cooperative approach. But that isn't the approach which President Trump wants to take. And it obviously is not the approach that Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu want to take at this point. There's no question that Israel, after the horrendous attack of October 7, 2023, has a right to defend itself. But the question is, how do you do it? And how do you bring permanent peace? What happens the day after you destroy everything and send a population into not having water, food, not being able to take care of the wounded? What happens then? The approach at this point seems to be that what you do is just destroy, and the people who are left alive, you move them somewhere else. And of course, this approach seems to be the approach which is now being taken in regard to Iran. What do you think? Do you think that you're going to be able, that anyone will be able just to pacify the situation by resorting to war and complete destruction? No. So yes, there'll be some discussion, But again, we've already seen that Canada has said there will not be any final communique from the G7. Why is that? Because they're afraid of what would happen as it did in 2018, where then President Trump, during his first term, after the communique had been pretty well worked out, said, no, I'm not going to sign it. And at this time, Canada said, well, we won't even get into that. So yes, should the G7 be able to work to try to build peace in regard to the Gaza situation, as well as that which obtains with Iran and obtains in Ukraine? Peace is not fragmented. It is indivisible, and you're not going to have a war, particularly if it involves nuclear weapons, which is isolated, and you're not going to have peace brought by simply destroying an entire populace. So that's a question that G7 ought to take up. But as I say, the signs are not good at this point that G7 would be able to do that.
Raymond Vickery, thank you for joining us. I also want to thank Daniel Roth, who was with us. We will continue to bring you updates from Alberta and Canada as discussions on the sidelines of this G7 summit continues. We'll also bring you all the updates from the Middle East as we get them. See you shortly.
Thank you.